Okay, so here we are with our lights, pats, and mats asset pack, and let's get started on how we use this. So you can see here that we have lights, mats, and patterns all divided in a category, and then we also have nodes, so if we want to drag these into our node groups to have instant mats, we can do that as well. But let us get started with the mat. So we can just pick any one of these, and just keep in mind that these were all designed as patterns first. So some of these are seamless, whereas others will be a little bit seamed. And they were meant for a flat surface at first, but then I decided to branch it out to 3D surfaces as well. So we can see here we got kind of a interesting, cool design. And if we go over to our shader panel with the object, we can have some control over the initial parameters of the material only. So let's hop over to the shading window or view, and we can see that we have this master shader. That's the one that appears here because that is connected to the material output. But if we go one node over, we can see that this is the node that actually has the pattern and design to it. So we can adjust the parameters and change accordingly. We can adjust the scale, have some interesting things going on there. And then we also have some of these coordinates and texture mapping things that apply to this node. So we can change, basic things. You probably won't play with this too much, but for advanced users, you can obviously dive into it and get a more flexibility with it. So let's go over to our lights now, or actually our patterns. So I believe this UV sphere should be UV unwrapped because patterns only really work well on UV unwrapped images. Let's, for instance, do this and see how that looks. Okay, so we can see that it is a little bit large, so we're just going to go over to the shading panel yet again and go to our master tiler. So all patterns have this master tiler. First, let's just change the grid density. Okay, so let's just set it something like 8. And so it's by default set at square patterns, but if you wanted to morph it into hexagonal patterns, you can just use this slider here. So can make some interesting shapes, and then obviously you can change some parameters here, play around with that. Yeah, and then we have our pattern parameters here, and then we have our mixed shader. So basically how this mixed shader works is the mat coming in differentiates between the shaders and also the colors. So for instance, we can see that this shader is currently at 0. So let me expand this. So this is the shade mixer. So this is mixing two shaders equally together, but it's using the mat as the factor value. So if we mess with the roughness on number 1, we'll see that the white changes. And if we mess with the roughness on number 2, we can see that the black changes. Okay, but if I left the roughness all the way down, I turned it up on number 1, so there's no roughness on the white. And now if I slide the mixer to the right, we can see that the white actually becomes the roughness goes down on the white as well, because that is now only using the second shader values completely. I encourage you to play around with it to get a really good feel for what it does. So of course we can change the colors just real quickly. So if you have a color palette, easy to add those, and then we can play with this to determine what part of the shader or which shader takes more priority. So yeah, play around with that and see what that does. But that is the patterns. And the next thing that we're going to look at is lighting. Oh, sorry, little monkey, we didn't get to you. But yeah, let's go to this lighting part. And so these are basically the same patterns as the pattern nodes, except they're hooked up with lights. So all we have to do is take one and drag it out, and we'll bring it up. So it's a spotlight. We can't see anything. So these only work in cycles. So we're going to have to go over to our viewport and change it. So you can see right there that we have this. Why don't we go over to the light panel? We can change the spotlight size. So now we have some nice light textures. And of course, this is all animatable, so you can add some movement, some cool looking patterns to your scene. These aren't hard to set up. It just takes a lot of time to set up for all these different types of configurations. One thing that we can do and kind of see, we can just get a cube real quick, just make it bigger. I'm gonna make it a, go into the shape, we're gonna make it a volume. We gotta go to cycles so we can really see the effects, and now we can see some rays. And so yeah, we have some light texture along with the volume, so you can do some cool things with that. I guess one thing we can do so we don't leave the monkey out, say we have a material. So what we can do, I'm just gonna open up the asset browser real quick here. All right, so we're just going to go to the nodes. We have all the nodes here. They're kind of made into special looking icons so you can know the difference between what we do. So you can just take any one of these and drag it right into here. And then you can use this as basically a mat for anything. You would have to set up like the texture coordinates. All right, so we'll just set up to object right now. And then if you had two materials, you could just clone that one, make this blue, and we can just get a mix shader. So assuming you already have your node set up, you can just use these two and then use this as the mat. And there you go. So you can mix shaders together pretty easily just using those nodes. Just put them in there just in case you wanted to access the nodes directly rather than adding the whole material. But there you have it. A fairly simple asset pack, but I think it could be useful, especially in scenes that require some cool looking patterns. So in total, you get over 50 patterns. It's actually closer to 60, both for lights and for materials. So it's a pretty decent pack that allows you to do lots of things. So we're in E view right now, but if we switch over to cycles, we can see those lights on the planes. The objects are dark because the scene is black. Yeah, there you have it. You've got plenty of things to add to your scene and start playing around with lights and patterns and fun textures.